Welcome to the Food Equity Fund Capacity Building Grant Info Session. Our goal today is to walk through the application process, eligibility requirements, and what to expect. We will also give examples of a strong application. This presentation will be about 30 minutes. We'll stop the recording and then have the rest of the time to answer any of your questions. So as you may know, the sweetened beverage tax is what makes the Food Equity Fund possible. This tax generates about $20 million for the city and supports numerous programs across multiple departments. The Food Equity Fund is just one of them, but was actually intentionally created by the Community Advisory Board, who is responsible for making recommendations to the city on how this tax should be spent. And the intent of the fund is to specifically invest in community food work led by Black, Indigenous, people of color, immigrants, refugees, people with low incomes, and elders. We actually have two grant programs, the general grant, which closed in March and will reopen in 2024, and the grant that we'll discuss today, the capacity building grant. Applicants, unfortunately, will not be able to have grants in both programs, so we can answer questions specific to that at the very end, but these are the two grant programs that we offer. Some requirements that we have is that projects must occur within Seattle. They must be accessible to people who live, learn, work, and/or worship in Seattle, some combination of that. There must be a focus on contributing to an equitable and sustainable local food system, and it must be completed within 24 months. And I just wanted to define quickly, by food system, we really mean sort of any activities related to food and look to you all to define what that means to you, but this can include growing food, sourcing food from local BIPOC producers, preparing food, teaching about food, distributing food in your community, or even managing food waste. So who should apply? This grant program prioritizes community organizations and groups with an annual budget of less than $500,000 a year. And the intention is to provide really a nimble grant to smaller grassroots organizations that are working in our local food system who historically have had limited access to city funding. And so in order to be eligible, organizations that have a 501c3 must have less than $500,000 in their annual budget. Community groups with less than $500,000 can work with a fiscal sponsor with a 501c3 nonprofit status to be eligible. Tribes and tribal organizations with less than $500,000, and of course, organizations and groups that are led by those who experience the most food and health inequities. And for short, we'll kind of reference this as our priority communities. So here's a visual of some of the eligible activities. I just want to do a quick description of some of them. We have folks that are working in a greenhouse. There's, if you notice, an application for construction. This just shows that we also fund capital projects or physical improvements. So this can include a new irrigation system or a greenhouse. We also have folks that are distributing food and cooking community meals and working in garden beds, and they want to grow more culturally relevant food in their neighborhoods, and they want to teach and share about their food and cultural traditions. This is all eligible within the Food Equity Fund. We unfortunately do have some ineligible applicants, and I'll run through them quickly. But the following applicants are not eligible. If you are 501c4, so if you are part of a political group, like working specifically for a candidate, you unfortunately cannot apply. if you're a for-profit entity, so like if you're a small business, we unfortunately cannot have folks apply for the Food Equity Fund. If you're just an individual person, this means that you are not part of a community group and there's not a group of individuals or a group of community leaders that are coming together and working on a project. This unfortunately is ineligible. And then major institutions, so if you're a school district or a hospital, and always feel free if any questions come up or you're kind of on the fence about something, you can contact one of our project managers directly and they can answer any questions about eligibility and before you submit a final application. So we also have some funding restrictions. These are some examples of expenses that are not eligible for reimbursement for the grant. So I won't go through all of them, but I wanted to highlight a few. For example, we wouldn't be able to pay for expenses made before the organization is under contract with the city of Seattle. So for example, if you bought a new fence for your garden this week, and you get selected in July, we wouldn't be able to reimburse you for this because the expense had happened before you were under contract with us. Purchases of vehicles, scholarships, any renovations or physical improvements to a private residence that isn't accessible by the public. These are kind of ineligible funding expenses, and we try to be comprehensive, but if, again, any hesitations, just please contact us and we can talk through it with you. And the last slide for me is our capacity building schedule. So this is our schedule. This is the flow for the grant. Some important highlights is that award amounts will be between $5,000 to $20,000. Applications will be accepted on a rolling basis. So there's technically no deadline. Essentially, whenever you're ready, please apply as soon as you can before October 31st or until funding runs out. In our pilot year, we have approximately $270,000 available specifically for the capacity building grant. So we expect to make about 13 to 15 grants, and it's really about, it's a first come, first serve. And again, this is, everything is approximate, but that's sort of the plan for the rest of the year. And in fairness to others, really applicants will only be able to apply for this funding once per calendar year. So if you are denied this year, we ask that you wait to reapply in 2024. Now to dig into the specific components of the process, I'll pass it to Lynn.
Thank you, Lisa, for kicking us off. Can I have the next slide, please? In the next few slides, I will be outlining 5 different steps to take throughout your application process. Step 1, please make sure to review our 2023 guidelines closely. Some things have changed since we instituted the program. After you have done that, I would strongly advise you to reach out to us by phone or email to discuss your project idea with a project manager. It's helpful to talk through the proposal before you put pen to paper. And remember, your project will be evaluated based on our current guidelines. Next slide, please. Step 2, in order to apply, you'll need to download the key forms from our webpage. These forms include the application, narrative questions, project timeline, grant request budget, leadership biographies, as well as any additional materials that may be required for your proposal. It's a good idea to download and review all of the forms before you begin working on your application. To access these key forms, you can either click on our webpage in the PowerPoint, or click on the link in the chat, or search City of Seattle Food Equity Fund in your internet browser. Next slide, please. Step 3, in addition to the general help mentioned in step 1, we also offer technical assistance, and we will review your draft application and provide feedback. We want to give you meaningful feedback, and in order to do that, we'll need at least 2 weeks to review and comment. Partially completed materials are accepted. However, we recommend applicants submit as much of the materials as possible so that the project managers can provide you the most comprehensive feedback. Next slide, please. Step 4. In order to officially apply, applicants must email all required application forms and any needed additional materials to foodequityfund@seattle.gov. Please do not submit it in person, via text, or any other method. Email is the only acceptable method to apply at this time. Next slide, please. Step 5. All applicants will be required to participate in a 45-minute virtual interview. Interviews will be conducted every Tuesday between 1 and 2:30 p.m. I'm sorry. An interview will be selected only after a Food Equity Fund project manager has reviewed the written portion of the application and determines that the application is complete and the project meets our Food Equity Fund guidelines. Once that determination has been made, a project manager will work with you to schedule your interview in the next available time slot. If the project is determined to be ineligible, you will be notified of that decision as well. Next slide, please. There are a number of ways to receive assistance on your application. We encourage applicants to make good use of all of the support services that we offer. This is our first of 3 info sessions. Congratulations, you're here. Thank you for that. The next one is Wednesday, June 14th from 10 to 11, and the final one is Tuesday, June 27th from 10 to 11. You are not required to attend another one. If someone else in your group or organization wants to attend one of the other 2, that's fine, but you've already completed that requirement by being here today. Our in-language support services are to ensure that applicants can receive application details in the language that they are most comfortable with. That shared, we are currently only accepting applications in written English. However, if you would like one-on-one support in a language other than English, we can set up a virtual meeting with an interpreter at no cost to you. Another service we want to highlight is our ongoing one-on-one support. Staff are available to answer questions you may have about eligibility or property ownership. We can assist you in your search for a fiscal sponsor, explain any insurance requirements, and last but not least, provide feedback on your draft application. Applicants can also reach out to us to set up a virtual meeting or phone call. With advance notice and scheduling, project managers are available to meet outside of regular business hours and on weekends. To learn more about how to receive application support, please visit our webpage. Next slide, please. And now I'll pass it back to Lisa for some additional information.
Thanks, Ellen. I just wanted to clarify one of the things that was mentioned in terms of the info session attendance. I know it's not required. I just wanted to clarify these recordings will be available online. If you know somebody that's interested, they can just view it. It's not a requirement to apply for the fund to attend the information session. Okay, so I just wanted to, Christina is going to help put our guidelines in the chat. Thank you, Ellen, for covering the slides. I wanted to actually just get into the application itself and the written responses. For this part, I will be referencing page 8 and 9 of the guidelines, which is essentially like our evaluation criteria. So feel free to follow along, or it'll be copy and pasted here. So the first item, this is a screenshot of the application form itself. So this is where we capture important information about you and your group. This is where your group name, your tax ID number, sort of the amount that you're funding, you're requesting for, which is up to 20,000. How long the project will be, where the project will be, and who the community will be part of in your proposal. Just make sure to have an accurate email and phone number, because we will use this contact information to schedule the required virtual interview. And I wanted to just highlight one thing is that in question number 5, actually 6, under the brief description of your grant request, so you'll have about 2 to 4 sentences to summarize the essential parts of your work, sort of the heart of the project. Don't feel too stressed about this limitation. You'll have an opportunity to expand on this in the narrative question, but this is sort of the summary that we use throughout the process. So for this grant, we're only asking 3 questions that we'd like for you to answer specifically in writing. There'll be another 3 questions in the virtual interview that my colleague Chian will cover, but this is essentially the who, how, and what of your project. So who is sort of your organization, sharing your organizational history, mission, and vision, sharing a successful effort or accomplishment that aligns with your proposal. The people, how is it getting done? Who, we know this work is people powered. So who's the community that you are part of? How are they engaged throughout your proposed work? You may also include existing partnerships and their role in this response. And what, please briefly describe what you will do with the capacity building grant. And this will be where you will use the project timeline and budget templates to go into further detail. So here are some tips and tricks. We mentioned the guidelines already. We're really looking for the project description and project timeline and budget to be aligned. You'll notice our apologies that work plan and project timeline is just being used interchangeably. So whatever is being referenced, it'll make sense when you kind of dig into the application, but it's essentially just your timeline. And then we want to emphasize that being clear is more important than the length of your answer. So I promise the more pages that you do doesn't necessarily mean the more chance that it'll get approved. So 10 pages doesn't make it be better. It just means we just would love for you to just be clear and concise about sort of what your project is all about. So I'm going to dig into actually all of the questions now. So the first one, as I mentioned, it's about your history mission, sharing a successful effort that you've done in the past. And what the reviewers are really going to be looking for is if your group's history, mission, and vision actually align with the proposal. And does the example of your accomplishment also align with your proposal? So for example, if your project proposal includes working with young people to start their own garden, you should probably give an example of a successful accomplishment or something that you have achieved working with young people in the past to complete the project. And I just want to emphasize, we're not looking only specifically for an organization's experience working in food. We just want to ensure that the experience is aligned and transferable. So again, if you've worked with young people to do all this amazing work around the criminal justice system, and you want to translate that into food because you are hearing that directly from young people in your work, then just sharing that and sort of sharing how food is sort of the natural evolution of your work. Question 2. This is really about who the community is and how are they involved. Are priority communities really key decision makers, and are they involved in most phases of the proposed work? Is it really clear who your community is? So the more specific, the better that you can be here is great. So back to the example of young people starting their own garden. Can you speak to how the youth leaders are being selected? How are they involved with building that garden? How are they involved with selecting the plants that go into the garden? Maybe the youth decide to have a workshop on native plants, like who's involved in creating the curriculum? How are the young people involved in decision making? This is just an example. We don't need, not everyone needs to have a garden, but just trying to give you an example of sort of the detail that we're looking for. And lastly, our last question that is part of the written process is we're just really looking for what you're going to do with the fund. So this is really where you kind of dig into your project timeline and your budget to go into further detail. So is the description clear? Does it align with the stated timeline and budget? And is it consistent with our purpose, which is advancing our priority populations and their leadership in the food system? I will pause there and pass it to my colleague, Jan.
Thank you, Lisa. So I'm going to go over quickly the second Word document that you need to fill out as part of your application packet. It is called the attachment. There are 3 sections in this Word document. The first section is the project timeline, which you can see here. Your project timeline is a great opportunity for you to demonstrate to reviewers that you have a roadmap leading to the successful completion of your project. So think about the key steps that will help you to carry out this work from beginning to the end. The reviewers will be looking to see if the activities and timeline in the work plan are realistic. Thus, it's very important that you include any numerical targets or goals whenever it's applicable. As you can see here as an example of an activity in the project timeline, we're going to save, organize, and purchase seeds and plan for 8 new raised beds for the 2024 planting season. This will begin August of 2023 and go until March of 2024. So it's very clear to the reviewer what are the activities involved, the numerical target for the activity, and the amount of time needed to complete the activity. Earlier we mentioned while our grant is for project up to 24 months, please do not feel pressure to stretch your timeline to 24 months. Your project timeline should be realistic to the number of months that you think it would take for your team to accomplish the project goal and activities. So this could be a 3, 6, 12, 18 months, whatever make the most sense for your project. Next slide, please. The second piece of the document, the second section of the document that you will see is the grant request budget. Please use and follow the template. In this space, you should only include expenses that will be paid for by the Food Equity Fund dollars. The maximum amount you can be awarded is $20,000. Therefore, this budget shouldn't be more than $20,000. Here, reviewer will be looking to see, is the budget feasible? Does it align with the attached project timeline and narrative? If your budget doesn't capture the full picture of your proposal, or if there are areas of your budget you feel like you want to explain a little bit more, please use the budget narrative section. This is 1 to 2 paragraph. This is optional, but maybe the Food Equity Fund is only funding a portion of your project and you want to explain your other source of funding, or that you may have a steady access to a free donated food supplies, and this is where you can explain it. And here, as you see, there are 4 budget categories on the template. You may or may not have expenditure in every category. Personnel. This category is pretty self-explanatory. Use this section if you plan to either pay existing staff to...
Look, you threw, but you missed some.
Christine,
right here.
can you help? Thank you.
Sorry. So 4 budget categories. So personnel. So this one is pretty self-explanatory. Use this section if you plan to either pay existing staff to accomplish key project tasks, or if you tend to hire additional staff. Professional services. Complete this section of the budget if you plan to hire independent contractor or consultant who will provide more short-term services to the project. So fiscal sponsorships services is one example. Other example including contractor, facilitator, educator, artist, etc. Supplies and materials. Any product you want to purchase will typically go into this section. For example, food, gardening tools, seeds, paper products. Construction and capital. You will only use this category if you are building something that is staying permanently. If that is the case, you are required to include a 15% contingency for all construction-related costs, including sales tax, to cover any unanticipated costs during the construction. Next slide, please. The final section of the document is the leadership bio. All we want to know is a little bit more about you and your leadership team. What skill, ability, and interest you and the team will bring to the project. And do the majority of your team members reflect the lived experiences of the priority community that you're working with? So to make things easier, I'm using my colleague Elaine Ruth here as an example. Elaine is going to be a youth coordinator for this project, focusing in the Rainier Vista neighborhood. So here I have listed a few things that are relevant to her role in the project. Everything you see here is true, except that Elaine is not applying. She volunteered as a mentor at the Rainier Vista Boys and Girls Club. She was a reading tutor for 3 years at Highland Park Elementary School and taught junior high school youth during the Vacation Bible School. So you can write a few short sentences or use the bullet point as I have here under the short bio. Next slide, please. Additional materials. After you have finished the application and the attachment, there are a few other things that may apply to you and will complete the application. So if you're applying as a 501c3 organization, you will need to provide a copy of the 501c3 determination letter from the IRS. If the document has been lost, we have including the online search tool link that you can use to get a copy. Thank you, Christina, for posting the link in the chat. And if you're applying as a community or ad hoc group and do not have 501c3 status, you will need a nonprofit 501c3 fiscal sponsor. The fiscal sponsor will assume the financial responsibility for the project. They will submit your request for reimbursement and will receive payment from the city. Fiscal sponsors typically charge a fee in the range of 5 to 10% of the grant amount. If you already have one, great. Please include your existing agreement. Or if you have identified one, please include their contact information, address, phone number, and email address. Next slide, please. Property owner permission letter is another additional material you will need to provide at the time of the application if it is applicable to your project. You will notice that we specifically asked about this in the application, question number 13. In general, if you're building on or making improvements to a piece of property that your organization does not own, you will need written permission from the property owner at the time of the application. This includes both public and private property. Projects that will occur on city property will be reviewed by the appropriate city department once a final application has been submitted. If you have physical improvement project, we highly encourage you to work with the Food Equity Fund staff early in the application process. Next slide, please. So let's look at a few examples here about the property owner permission. Building a greenhouse or building a new garden bed will need property owner permission with your application. However, confirming the location for a conference is something that can be done within the contract period, as any number of locations might be appropriate. So it does not have to be confirmed at the time of application. Next slide, please. So earlier, my colleague already talked about the virtual interviews. Here's a copy of the interview questions. These questions are also available in the application form for your reference. Please do review page 9 of the Capacity Building Grant Guidelines, which talk about what reviewers are looking for in terms of the virtual interview. And please note that in addition to these 3 questions listed here, there may be additional project-specific questions asked during the virtual interview. If that is the case, program staff will for sure send an additional question to the applicant ahead of time, so there's no surprise. Next slide, please. What to expect if awarded. If funded, organization and or fiscal sponsor will be required to attend an orientation, finalize project outcome, payment structure, and sign a contract with the city. have a current City of Seattle business license, secure and provide evidence of commercial general liability insurance. This is not event insurance. This is a liability coverage that is provided at the time of contracting and must be active throughout the length of the contract, and adding City of Seattle as additional insurer. This is also something the project manager will help with. If applicable, secure Washington patrol background check, especially if you're working with youth under the age of 18. We may ask for proof of that, and you can also include the cost of this in your budget. Comply with federal ADA requirements. All the design and all capital project must follow federal law to provide readily accessible facility. If this requirement is applicable to you, especially if the improvement is on city property, we can refer you to the appropriate staff for guidance. Next slide, please. So a complete application will include the following required materials: a complete application form, the written response, attachment of project timeline, grant request budget, leadership bio, and any additional materials such as a property owner permission letter, if applicable to your proposal. Next slide, please. So here is a list of the Full Equity Fund staff's email addresses. If you'd like to contact any one of us directly, I just let it post for a little longer so you have it. We can go to the next slide. Now I'm going to pass it on to Christina, who will help facilitate the question and answer. Thank you.
Thanks, Jan.